Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast with Pastor Judah Smith is brought to you by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. Your chance to release a child from poverty is right now with Compassion International. It's $38 a month. And go to compassion.com/sports spectrum. You'll see a list of children there. Choose the child in need, sponsor them, and you release them from poverty. It's that simple for $38. Your sponsorship includes education and tutoring, medical care, food that they need, vocational training as they get older, and the opportunity to know Jesus Christ. That's the most important thing. Over 2 million children are breaking the cycle of poverty for good because of Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sports spectrum and sponsor a child today. Today's episode of the podcast, we welcome Judah Smith, the New York Times bestselling author and the pastor of Churchome out in Seattle and Los Angeles. We welcome Judah here to the podcast. Lots of good stuff to talk to Judah about. He's the author of 3 books, including Jesus Is, Life Is, and How's Your Soul? He's also the chaplain for the Seattle Seahawks, along with his main job being the pastor at Churchome, a thriving multi-site church noted for its cultural relevance and its love to Jesus, along with commitment to biblical integrity and faith. And Judah's latest endeavor is the Churchome Global app, which we'll talk about in a minute, and is available everywhere in the App Store for whatever device you have. And Judah's also very connected in the sports world and even the celebrity world. And I wanted to have him on not only to talk about his journey through faith and certainly being a pastor and his love for sports, but even more than that, I just wanted to hear his encouragement for those that we think are in this spotlight, this celebrity world, and how they can still really dive into the Word and be encouraged in their faith and trusting in God. And as Judah put it, living a personal, private, and public life the same way in Christ. So good stuff here from Judah Smith. I really think you'll be encouraged by our conversation. Take a listen. It's Judah Smith here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Judah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Judah, it is great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us here. Let's start with Churchome, telling those that are listening that may not know exactly what you're doing right now with Churchome and knowing about the church that you pastor in Seattle and Los Angeles. Tell us how you came to be the lead pastor and what Churchome is all about.
Oh, perfect. Well, thanks for asking. My dad started what was then called City Church, which we changed the name a few years ago to Churchome. City Church was started in 1992 with about 20 people in a suburb of Seattle called Bellevue, Washington. We started at a Courtyard Marriott in one of their conference rooms, and it's grown. Obviously, we're about 26 years old now, and we have about 4 locations in Seattle, a location in LA, and now with Churchome Global, our new technology, we're building small groups and communities actually all over the world. So I've only been pastoring the church for about 10 years. The way that came about is my dad suddenly started to fight cancer and things started to deteriorate. And so the board asked if I would step in leadership and, of course, with my dad's blessing. And I miss him every day, that's for sure. He's now in heaven. But it really is an honor to lead what I think is just the most incredible group of people called Churchome.
Judah, you mentioned the Churchome Global app. I want to ask you about that. Tell us about the new project, the heart behind it, because so many of us listening are sort of belonging to the traditional type of church model that so many of us know. And this Churchome Global app in many ways is a game changer. It's been around for a few months. Tell us about the new project and why you had such a heart to create something like this for the mass public.
Well, yeah, it's a passion of ours to really leverage the moment that we have with technology. And whether or not technology stays forever, we believe that we have an opportunity in a moment to build true, authentic, followers of Jesus. And And of course, walking into a church building doesn't make you a follower of Jesus. We've heard all the metaphors like, sitting in a garage makes you a car. And so the idea isn't just attending a building, but the idea is really following Jesus and then having real tactile relationships. I know you, Jason, are a big believer, as we are, in small groups. And so in a matter of 3 months now with this new technology, we've seen over 900 small groups started and already thousands of people signed up to join a regular weekly conversation, if not multiple times a week, meet at cafes, living rooms, family rooms. And we're seeing this app does not exist just so someone can sit at home by themselves and watch a sermon. It exists to begin to connect people and build relationship. And we're finding today in the modern church, particularly sometimes the size of some of our auditoriums, it's very easy to slip in, sing a song, listen to a preacher, and not really experience discipleship and spiritual growth, which comes about by relationship with God and relationship with others in community. So we believe that this can be actually a tool that will promote tactile relationship and truly following Jesus, maybe even more efficiently and effectively than an actual brick and mortar building.
Judah, as you started putting this project together, and I'm thinking out loud here, this is a great idea. And I love that, you want to kind of develop these connections and relationships. But even in this day and age, when we're more connected than ever in many ways, and being the dad of a teenage daughter, watching her connect with her friends via social media and on her phone, we're also maybe more disconnected than we've ever been in terms of not being able to communicate with people face to face anymore. How did you take that into account as you develop this app, knowing where we are as a society today?
It's a very sobering perspective, and one that we consider on a daily basis with the team that's building this technology. I think technology, like money, is neither good nor bad. It's what you do with it. And I think technology can be, I just got, before this Skype got off of this, having a discussion with my wife, just talking about turning my phone off once a week and sticking to that and committing to that for a whole 24-hour period. So I agree with that. I also believe, again, our big win in this technology is that it leads to tactile connection and relationship. We will not be successful building a global church if this technology merely becomes talking on a screen. That's where it starts. Watching a sermon on a screen, that's where it starts. But our passion is to see small groups of Jesus followers and those interested in following Jesus connecting, getting together, because I still believe in this idea of following our Messiah. It started with 12 young guys, and it's now billions around the world, and it only needs to grow. And so we are passionate at Churchome. We believe you can have church in your home, but we believe that it has to lead to real relationship with others, because we really can't do this alone.
Judah Smith joins us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. And again, the app is the Churchome Global app, available everywhere for your digital device, and Apple, certainly in the App Store. So check it out, Churchome Global app. And Judah, this is a faith and sports podcast, and you're connected quite a bit into this world of sports. Let's talk a little sports for a minute.
Come on.
Yeah, and let's get into it and just find out kind of where your love of sports began. What was sports in the life of Judah Smith as a kid growing up? What was that like?
Absolutely obsessed. Sports was right up there with God, to be frank, and
Yep.
that was something I would have to deal with later in life. But I had all of my hopes and dreams wrapped up in either pro basketball, pro tennis, and then later in life, I still have aspirations for pro golf. I'm still dreaming at 40 that maybe, just maybe, I can catch that big break. But obsessed. I mean, whether it's Come Fly With Me, Michael Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air every day and watching which Jordans Will Smith would be wearing, to the Fab Five at Michigan, my favorite sports team in history, to my favorite tennis player, Andre Agassi, and his long hair, bleached blonde and acid wash jeans. And I mean, just, a Nike nut, grew up just needing Jordans and all that. So, man, I am like the classic scenario and case. Played tennis at my high school, played football at my high school, played basketball at my high school. And I'll say this, We went to, at the time in 1997, the greatest assemblance of high school basketball talent in Las Vegas. We got asked to go, our high school team at Issaquah High School in Seattle, Washington, because of our center who was 6'11", 275, Jason Heide. He was unbelievable. So I got to play in front of Coach K and Roy Williams. But I got to say, Jason, the championship game, Tracy McGrady
T-Mac, yeah.
was the big name. And when I saw him going into my senior year of high school, when I saw Tracy McGrady play, it is literally when I decided to stop playing basketball. And that is an actual fact. My dad can confirm that. I saw him play and I thought, I am wasting my time. It is time for me to study my Bible and become a janitor at my dad's church. So that's what I did.
That's a great story. And I know that you're friends with Carl Lentz, another pastor for Hillsong Church in New York City. And Carl is a former college basketball player himself. And I just wonder if there's some competition there in playing the game of basketball still even to this day and getting those shoes laced and playing some pickup ball with Carl. Is that something that's still on the radar for you?
Oh man, I had two knee surgeries on my left knee, Jason. So that's my excuse. I'm sticking to it. I now have a golf body, so I want to protect my golf swing. So Carl is constantly persuading me to get on the basketball court with him. But it is true, ladies and gentlemen, this guy Carl Lentz still plays basketball 3 to 5 times a week. So I wish I could say I do that. I'm trying to golf 3 times a week. That's what I'm trying to do.
Oh, that's really great. Yeah, I miss basketball and playing it myself, and it might be a golf world for me too. Judah Smith's our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Let's pivot a little bit, Judah, go a little deeper. Speaking of sports and athletes, and you've been a pastor now for quite a long time, and you've connected with quite a few athletes in your time as a pastor, including being the Seattle Seahawks chaplain.
Right.
What do you see as the biggest struggle right now for athletes in their walk with Christ? What's been the biggest struggle you've seen in talking to these guys and being around them?
Well, I think, I was going to say I still think, but it's kind of a newer concept. Speaking of technology, the effect of technology, I think, on the soul and the brain, particularly of famous people, of recognizable people, affluent people, influential people, is growing. It's kind of an epidemic, to be frank. It's affecting not only performance on the field, but it's affecting the condition, I think, of the athletes and influencer's soul at home. This idea of reprieve, space, margin, peace, recovery, rest. If we're not careful, it's not really happening because of the constant being stimulated by your phone, and adrenaline is triggered and all of these things. And I'm literally working with a friend right now who's doing extensive studies on his brain. And we're finding that there has been, a lot of negative effect by constantly being on, if that makes sense. And I guess that would be the short answer, is I feel like so many of these athletes and entertainers are struggling from they're constantly on. They're just constantly on. And of course, Jesus says, come to me and I'll show you how to take a real rest. Jesus was not constantly on. I mean, think about that. God in the flesh was not constantly on. God designed us for margin, for Sabbath, for rest. Frankly, he makes us go to sleep. He makes me lie down in green pastures every night to recover. And so this idea of reprieve and recovery is I don't know if lost art is the right way of saying it, but it sure seems to be the case.
And that's not just athletes, right? I mean, That's a problem we've seen in society, really, with all people, right?
It really is. It really is. And then, of course, if you add a little fame, if you add a little fortune, if you add a little, eyes are on you and people want to comment on your stuff and things that they see, I think it can at times double down on the pressure and feelings of anxiety and just restlessness.
Judah, is there a story that you can share of a time that you spent with an athlete or athletes? Certainly don't name names again here for privacy reasons, but athlete that came to Christ or really had an encounter with the Lord where his life was just transformed. Can you share a story or two?
Oh man, my only problem is how many stories.
I love that.
And honestly, Jason, I have to admit, I've had moments where I've told God, if the gospel doesn't work for blank, if the gospel doesn't work for this person, then Jesus, the gospel doesn't work. And I've told that to some of my athlete friends, entertainers. I just want you to know that I prayed to God that if the gospel doesn't work for you, if it doesn't transform you, then it doesn't transform anyone, because there can't be exceptions to the gospel. There can't be exceptions to the transformative power of Jesus. And so, I mean, I've seen athletes whose performance completely went away. I mean, they suddenly were not good at their craft anymore, and yet in the midst of it, at rock bottom, they met Jesus in such a profound way. In two cases I can think of, their ability on the field, on the course, on the court improved dramatically, and in a couple other cases, it was never recovered, and yet they were fulfilled and satisfied. And I must say, both are so profound to watch a man whose identity is wrapped up in their performance on a course or a court or a field, and yet that performance is not enhanced by the transformative power of Jesus. It actually kind of fades, and yet they're more satisfied, more fulfilled, more at peace, more at rest than they've ever been. That's an astounding thing to watch. And I've said this so many times to different friends and incredible relationships that I get to have and walk with, that these men have taught me more about Jesus than I feel like I could ever teach them. It's been an honor to watch.
That's good stuff there. Judah, I was looking at Twitter recently and saw that you recently tweeted this: be the same person privately, publicly, and personally. You've spent a lot of time with athletes and entertainers and high-profile people. I've been around athletes for 20 years myself. Is it possible for people with a large influence to live that way? I got to imagine it's very difficult for many of the guys in your circle to be the same person privately, publicly, and personally.
Very difficult, and it's certainly easier to tweet than to do.
Sure, of course.
I actually think, to your point earlier, Jason, or to your question, what do so many of these athletes and people of influence suffer from? I think it's the disparity. I think the disparity eats at the human soul. And what I mean by disparity is the soul was not intended to have this separation, right? This idea of my devotional life and my professional life never do meet. This separation of church and state, which is a westernized concept. It doesn't come from scripture, and we've allowed that to seep into our lives. So it's like, wait, who I am on the field doesn't have to be who I am at home. Who I am at home doesn't have to be who I am on the platform. And the problem is, as much as we tell ourselves that, our soul was designed for consistency. We were made in the image of God, and his essence is holiness, which means consistent. And so when we lack that consistency, it actually eats at our soul. I think it haunts us, and it drives us to forms of sin and compromise that we seek for escape, which actually only doubles down on the inconsistency and the disparity in our life. And so I think closing that gap by the help of Jesus and the grace of God leads to so much more soul health and so much more ease and rest in life. I know in my own experience, Jason, when I'm on stage preaching and I feel like I have suddenly something to hide, like I've done something in a given week that the board would not be proud of, I'm not proud. It's a different experience trying to teach Jesus and preach the gospel when you know there's some inconsistency in your soul. It is not enjoyable at all.
Is it weird for you to be sort of lumped in a little bit in this sort of celebrity influencer person being recognized in the public world? I know that obviously your church growing and growing is a great thing for the kingdom, but it also brings a platform that's larger than many and an opportunity to sort of be seen as an influencer / celebrity even. Is that weird for you, taking pictures in public and just being recognized?
Well, it is an interesting aspect. And like yourself, we have friends who actually, are truly well known, but right. We all have our subcultures, where people might recognize you. And generally speaking, I must say, I'm always floored and flattered and so blown away by people's kind words. Or if anyone wants a photo, I'm still the guy who's like, oh my gosh, yes, like this feels so cool. Thank you. but I don't think at times we know what it does do to to the soul, to the psyche, to the brain. I think it can become something where you're constantly aware and on guard, and it's hard to let down sometimes. And then if you're not careful, you kind of start believing the persona. You start believing instead of who you are and who God's designed you to be, and the struggles you really have, you start to believe the person in the airport who's like, "You've changed my life. You're the best. Can I have a photo?" And suddenly, you start to think, "Oh, I must be okay because what that person said at the airport says that I've done this or that." Where in your own heart, you know that you're a work in progress. You're broken. You need the grace of God like everybody else, and you're not a hero. Jesus is the hero, and that's, I think, for anybody who has any platform on any level, it's ensuring that the platform is not what defines who you are. It's really who you are on and off the platform.
Couple more questions here with Judah Smith on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Judah, we like to ask this question to all of our guests that are pastors on the podcast, because you spend so much time pouring into others, teaching others, helping others, spiritually mentoring others in their walk with the Lord. How do you stay fed? How do you stay grounded in your faith and being poured into, and not just being the one pouring into others, but actually being poured into? What's that look like for you in your life?
Well, first and foremost, to me, it's relationship, and that's our calling card at Churchome. That's the calling card of this technology, Churchome Global. We need real, authentic, genuine relationship, and I cannot underscore that and emphasize that enough. I'm so grateful to have a board that meets at the minimum. We meet 3 times a year. I can call emergency meetings. These are pastors, leaders, overseers. I've confessed sins to them. I've confessed weaknesses, weariness. I have a leadership team. We just got done with a leadership summit from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. For 2 straight days. And these are my brothers. My wife Chelsea's on that team, and before any business is done, there is just a known reality that at any moment Chelsea and I can just stop the meeting and say, "Hey, here's what's going on in our marriage," or "Here's what's going on with our kids." There's a lot of tears shared there. There's a lot of laughter shared there. There's a lot of prayers shared there. I really can't imagine my life without those two key leadership protecting agents and friends. And then people like Carl Lentz, my pastor Brian Houston at Hillsong Church, Craig Rochelle, Frank Damasio. I could go on and on of these men that at a moment's notice I can text and call, and I do. It's not Brian Houston's job to call me and check in on me. I call him and let him know how I'm doing and how my soul is. And so I just believe that. Last night I was out till 1:30 a.m. after church. We had church here in LA, and what we were doing is just with some of my closest friends, and we're just talking about Jesus. We're just talking. We went around the circle, as cheesy as this may sound, and we told each other what we loved about each other. And I told my friend, "You have the gift of prophecy, and you have this kind of gift, and I just love you." And we laughed a ton, and yeah, so it's just I can't imagine life without that, and I feel incredibly wealthy, and that has nothing to do with money.
Judah, it's been great to have you here on the podcast. As we close, and our final question here for you, and I've been so encouraged by the books that you've written. Jesus Is and Life Is are wonderful books, great encouragement for me.
Thank you.
I haven't read your latest book yet called How's Your Soul, but I thought it would be timely, I guess, to ask this question to you as you asked it to others as we close here. How is your soul doing, Pastor Judah? Tell us about your soul and how it's doing right now.
Thank you for asking. It's been better, to be incredibly candid. It really has. And I think that's, I didn't know that this was where the podcast would conclude, but it's not planned, but Chelsea and I, just a spontaneous conversation as you do in marriage, and just, hey, you need a real day off. And I think that is something. I'm such a spontaneous person by nature. Spontaneity for me is the thing of life. I love it. I love following Jesus. I love what may and could happen today with Jesus. But the downside sometimes of my personality disposition is I'm kind of always on, like I mentioned earlier, and I'll quote my wife from about an hour ago. She said, I don't know if there's, 2 minutes that you're, 2 minutes go by that you don't, look at your phone. And I don't have any social media on my phone. I don't have internet on my phone. So it's actually not that. It's just looking at text from friends and people that I walk with on a daily basis, which I am incredibly honored. But in the words of my wife, she said, you're not a savior. That's Jesus. And so turning your phone off, taking a day off, that is just something that has to be a conviction. And so, what's amazing, Jason, is like the moment you think, you got this thing figured out, there's always something to bring you back to that childlike, hopefully humility and wide-eyed wonder to say, Jesus, I need you, and I'm not okay without you. I'm not well without you. I don't want to do this without you. And so today is one of those reflective days where I feel like my soul could be better. I feel a little weary. We've been going pretty hard in this technology and doing a lot of shoots and a lot of videos, and gosh, it's my honor, and I love my job. But I want to work from a strong place and from a full place. And so we'll certainly take some time as a family. I'm going to turn my phone off the whole day tomorrow. That's my confession and conviction right on this podcast. I'm doing it tomorrow, Jason. Now I have to stick to it. So I'm doing it.
That's true. And now we have this recorded. And if you need a copy for me to keep you accountable and send it back to you so you can play it for your family, we can certainly do that.
Okay, perfect.
Judah Smith, it's been a pleasure having you here on the podcast. Really appreciate your encouragement and your time. We wish you nothing but the best with your books, Jesus Is, How's Your Soul, Life Is, certainly all that's going on with Churchome in Seattle and in Los Angeles, and the Churchome Global app available everywhere to download in the App Store. Check it out, the Churchome Global app. Judah, thanks again. Hopefully we'll catch up again soon and talk a little sports. All the best to you.
Thank you, Jason. My privilege.
And many thanks to Judah Smith, the pastor of Churchome in Seattle and Los Angeles, the New York Times bestselling author of Jesus Is, Life Is, and How's Your Soul. Thanks to Judah for being here on the podcast. You can pick up his books, obviously, wherever books are sold. Go to Amazon, anywhere you can find books. Judah's books are there. I've been very encouraged by his books, Jesus Is and Life Is, really have encouraged me and helped me along in my walk with the Lord. Check out his website, churchome.org, churchome.org. You can also download the app there, the Churchome Global app. Of course, they're available everywhere apps are available on your devices. And you can also check him out on social media at Judah Smith on Twitter and Instagram at Judah Smith. Many thanks to Pastor Judah for joining us here on the podcast. Also want to thank our sponsors, Compassion International, $38 a month. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum. And you can sponsor a child and release them from poverty in Jesus' name. Let's invite each other into this place where we can make a difference in a child's life. Make room around your dinner table to help a child who needs you and help a child and change their life forever. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum and sponsor a child today. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Find us on social media at Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Our handle is at sports_spectrum. Take a screenshot of this podcast, share the link. Make sure you tag us. We'll retweet it. We'll let people know that you were sharing about the podcast. We'll definitely send you a note back thanking you for listening. That's how we do it on Sports Spectrum on social media. So thanks for doing that. You can also leave a review on iTunes. Go to iTunes on the Apple Podcasts app and leave a review of this podcast. It helps get the word out. And check out our website, sportspectrum.com, sportspectrum.com, where all of our content can be found, daily articles, first-person accounts from the athletes themselves, daily devotionals. All of it can be found, including every podcast we've ever done. And we're over 2 years now on this podcast. It's been amazing, this 2-year run, over 700,000 downloads of the podcast. We just appreciate you for joining us here, checking us out. Check out all of our content at sportspectrum.com. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast.